Love as indifference. My attempt here in this essay is to kind of look at love in a different light, and obviously in terms of indifference. But I think it arises out of the kind of negative connotation that indifference carries, especially in love itself, where it's almost like a sin to be indifferent to someone that you love. You know, either someone wants some kind of specific enthusiasm or a kind of specific reaction from their partner, whether negative or positive, to kind of prove the partner's love or I guess dislike or not love for the other person. And of course, this is actually highly influenced from the essay and YouTube video from OG Rose's disaster formula, which I will link in my YouTube here. The formula is, if you cared about X, you would have done Y. So I guess this is a perfect opening to kind of go into my essay. So again, the inspiration roots from OG Rose's video called the disaster formula. If you cared about X, you would have done Y. I think this formula is dangerous to any relationship because it confines the individual within a criterion which questions their partner's principles and actions that do not coincide with their own demands. It ultimately fails because it does not allow any other possibilities of care within an individual to express itself, creating a condition of care that deems all their possibilities as void and negligent. Therefore, it forces the partner to satisfy one condition that they will continuously struggle to meet, and when they again do fail to meet them, their love and care is once more questioned. I believe this to be clear, that this is not a sustainable nor a healthy relationship to abide in. Okay, so now the real beginning of my essay starts. Chapter 1, Conventional Indifference. What I will attempt here is to explicate the conventional understanding of indifference in relationship to my experiences rather than the definitional indifference. In my day-to-day interactions with people, I would say most deem indifference in the negative, that is to say, not caring. Indifference is then reduced to a, quote, not enough, quote, condition to display appropriate affection towards beings. But how do we determine, quote, not enough, quote, and is it possible for indifference to be satisfactory on its own? Chapter 2, Reworking Indifference. To wrap the mind on the conceptual possibility of indifference being viewed in a positive light is no easy undertaking. I reflected on how to best express and reduce the doubts that may manifest, but nonetheless, any attempt always leaves room for such errors and spaces. However, I do believe an empty room itself can give proper justice and redemption to indifference. Why? Because an empty room is rather indifferent. It is neither bothered nor excited with any movement I express. It is always there and not there in the context of the attention I choose to give to it. An empty room as indifference allows for every possibility to exist in the given capacity of the individual. This allowance can actualize love in a variety of ways that is particular to the person. Chapter 3, Indifference maximizes love. An empty room is the maximalization of all possibilities to decorate and furnish it. The paradox of an empty room is that it receives without demand or condition upon the individual. In return, they love the room. In doing so, they willingly choose to dwell and care for the room as if the room were their own. It has this sense of quote, ownness due to the space that is allowed for the individual to express. However, this ownness is actually a misinterpretation, for it is the space of the room that expresses its own abundance to the individual. In other words, this space is the room's love for the person. There is no actual possession here. Chapter 4, Empty Room Formula. The irony in becoming an empty room for a person entails you to go beyond yourself and the demands you require. The empty room analogy is significant because it is abundant and complete on its own accord. It's the idea of negative space that deems itself as abundant rather than empty. There are no qualms about the individual leaving or staying, all is cherished the same. The empty room allows manifestation of any kind rather than set conditions for manifestations of certain kinds. Chapter 5, is it practical? For two people to both meet these conditions are perhaps rare, some could argue, though it is my belief rare should not be your cop-out when it comes to love, but instead the hardest and most desired task to pursue. Why? Because it requires arduous work upon both individuals, which lays down the foundation of being abundant on your own rather than demanding someone else to be abundant for you. If two individuals are striving to be abundant on their own, sacrificing and tearing away at yourself cannot exist. For giving is always receiving, and receiving is always giving. That is to say, abundance. Lastly, to borrow a quote from Khalil Gibran, fill each other's cup, but drink not from one cup. Okay, so that is really the end of the essay. I found this aspect of the empty room rather interesting, and it kind of just created itself out of my attempting to write this explanation of indifference as love. So I had actually no idea prior about the empty room. So, that's something that kind of manifested on its own as I was beginning to write this. So that's interesting thing to note there. But I went with it, and I think it was a good example. I think some qualms people might have about this particular essay. One, I can hear people saying, what about my needs? What about my, isn't it okay for you to have needs? Isn't it okay for you to kind of have these comforts from another human being? And I think there is merit to that question, especially as human beings. However, the kind of love here that I'm talking about is much deeper than the love that we are conventionally accustomed to and sort of, socially kind of influenced by. It's much deeper than this. I mean, of course, there's givens in terms of, I need some kind of social interaction and so on. But love as indifference is sort of this idea of perhaps thankfulness and cherishingness, right? And I thought the empty room analogy, and perhaps maybe an empty house would have been better, but it's this idea, to kind of borrow from Rumi, about being a dwelling place where you treat people with, like, you treat them as guests, right? In your heart. Let's just put it that way. You treat them as guests in your heart, so you neither want to possess them or demand anything from them, right? You're just kind of, you treat them, right? You care for them, you treat them, you cherish their company, and if they choose to leave, like guests normally do, then you still cherish them the same, right? You wish them well, and so on. So really, when you're being hospitable, there is no demanding, right? There is only sort of cherishing, thankfulness, and giving from your own abundance, right? Your own house, your food, your care, and in your shelter, right? And if you can realize the significance of this, especially if two people are able to accomplish this, of what I'm talking about, if two people can accomplish this, the paradox of kind of having needs is that they will be met anyways. They will be met kind of without effort. And some people may have a hard time trying to grasp, well, how is it that, how can we make a distinguishment between sacrificing and giving from abundance? Well, the one way we can make this distinguishment is, one, you don't have a feeling of them owing you, right? That they should kind of repay you for some kind of act that you've done. And oftentimes in, many relationships, whether it be friendships or love, there's always this kind of aspect of either a kind of martyrdom aspect, where it's like, I love them so much, I'm willing to sort of sacrifice myself away. But that already in itself is it's already a losing mindset, right? Because you are somehow putting yourself in a mindset of deep privation, right? You're depriving, you have a sense of depriving yourself for somebody else, which ultimately isn't good in the long run, right? And it can even manifest as abuse without you even realizing it. This kind of mindset of, I am sacrificing myself for this person. So this idea of giving out of abundance is that what I try to capitalize on here is, when you as a person are giving out of abundance from your own sort of liveliness and yourself, there is no sense of like, they should give me this because I gave them this. And there should be no sense of that I am giving myself away to them because I love them this much. It's none of that kind of mindset. It's, I give because I am this giving. You know what I mean? I give because I am giving itself, if that makes any sense. And so this idea of need kind of vanishes, this idea of sacrifice vanishes, this idea of self destruction, martyrdom kind of love doesn't exist in this kind of love that I'm trying to portray here in my essay. It doesn't exist. It's quite, you could say it's quite mystical even, or, religious in terms of Buddhist, or mystical. Yeah, mystical is appropriate. It could be related that way, but I still think that when we perceive love in this manner, it allows for a vastness that isn't usually appreciated between two individuals, right? I think someone that actually pursues this path wholeheartedly for themselves can really appreciate differences, right, between individuals, and yet not demand right? Not have a demanding condition for their partner to display love for them, right? Because it's like, it's kind of really like the ultimate form of self-love, really. I think a lot, I think really a lot of self-love is sort of like shallow, honestly. Even the idea of like, oh, I don't need nobody kind of thing, I think that's even a shallow kind of mindset. Because it takes away the appreciative part of having someone enter or be a part of your life, right? And I think that's why I try to capitalize on love as indifference, because love as indifference would be someone that welcomes you into loving them if you want to love them, and bids you farewell just the same if you choose not to love them, right? There is no harsh or bitter resentment or maybe obsession with them wanting you to stay or wanting you to leave. There is none of that, right? So it's rather indifferent. But the thing is, they cherish you the way any, guest would be cherished if they were to stumble upon a house and needing help and need and sheltering. And what's really significant is that if two people can accomplish that, right, you can basically be each other's, guests and shelters, right? When needs arise, and I think that's, but I did say that is quite rare. I did say that is quite rare, but we can begin to make that change from the individual level, and if one person can do this, I would say it would make, I feel confident to say that it would make love easier, at least attempt to be easier and more flexible and workable and so on, if one can reach a kind of understanding like this. And so, because one less demanding person is, usually helpful, and so on, and that you can appreciate a difference or the differences you have with your partner, and sort of love them as they are, as they arrive, right? And I think that's very important, to love someone and people as they are and as they arrive and as they leave. And by no means is this a easy task. I mean, constantly, but the thing is, because it's a difficult task, it's makes it that much more times worth a task that is pursuing. Oftentimes people sort of dismiss this because they say it's too idealistic. But I feel like that's sort of a cop-out of an explanation or of an excuse to not pursue this. It's precisely because it is so difficult to attain and do that it is probably one of the tasks that is 100% worth doing and worth pursuing in the course of our lifetime, to sort of be these people that appreciate people as they come, as they arrive, and as they leave. And it makes life more rich and more, less painful, honestly. It really does, because, it just makes it less painful. And it's an experience that, it's something that you have to sort of do on your own. I can't, even my own explanation of this experience will always fall short. So it does require conditions for you to meet them. And, I do find that lately love is sort of seen as a game and met with demands, and people leave other people for not satisfying certain demands and so on. All out of this idea of sort of, I'm not getting enough this, I wasn't receiving this, all these things. And of course, I'm not giving examples of, the more reasonable explanations for leaving, like abuse and so on, because those are reasonable ones. But again, I would argue that those kind of instances of abuse and so on exist because of those exaggerated needs of possession and wanting demands to be met, rather than, because if a person were to realize that they were sort of abundant on their own, then there would really, abuse and possession and exaggeration and jealousy wouldn't exist. It wouldn't exist, because those things are fear of something being missed, right? Of never being filled again. So when you lose this kind of dependence, all those kind of errors cease to exist in those things, in those things themselves. So, hopefully I've made that clear. And perhaps I will write an essay. I do need to write an essay on my philosophy about possession versus responsibility, which has quite been the significant engine in my thinking as of recent, with a lot of the works that I've been publishing. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that essay. I welcome any criticism. No work is perfect. And I hope you all take care.